So here we go. So again, I want to thank Erin, who happens to be my daughter. Today is Earth Day, so I think it's a perfect day for Erin to share with us. And Erin, do you want to stand up and show it, the shirt you have on from your few years ago, the Bronx River cleanup? So she's dressed appropriately for today. She designed that shirt when she did a river cleanup. And Erin is an amateur beekeeper, well, I would say quite professional now. You've been doing it for quite a while.
No, definitely still.
But you're working with a lot of professionals, so you're able to share a lot of your experiences. How long have you been doing this now, Erin?
2 years. 2 years, yeah. April 13th.
So we want to hear about what's been going on this year. This is your third presentation for the Taking Care of Beezness?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So we want to hear all about what's going on with Silent Spring. And on Earth Day, I think it's a very good thing to hear about. So I'm going to hand the program over to you. I'm going to mute all. If you have any questions, please use the chat box. I will be checking that. Okay, so let me mute all, and then I'm going to unmute you, Erin. So just 1 second. Okay, Erin, you're all set.
Okay, and yeah, at the end of this, there will be a question and answer, section, obviously, where you can ask and everything like that. So, without further ado, let me share my screen with all of you. So, yes, for those of you who have joined me before at the library program, Taking Care of Beezness, I've talked about my adventures in beekeeping and at the Hive, and I will definitely be sharing things that maybe some of you have heard before if you've joined me before, as well as some new information. And the reason why, I'm Erin Provenzano, by the way, but I was already introduced, but I'm an amateur beekeeper. I've been keeping bees for 2 years now, since April 13th of 2018, with my friend Lauren, and we were keeping our bees in Ossining, and I'll be going into more information on that. But the reason why I'm calling this Silent Spring, I don't know if any of you have read any of Rachel Carson. She's an environmentalist, and her most well-known piece is Silent Spring, and this is actually a quote from it. In nature, nothing exists alone. And this is true, obviously, with most things, but I thought it was really appropriate for today's program, because bees, they're not solitary. Honeybees are not solitary. They are very social, and they cannot do the amazing work they do alone. I encourage you, if you've not read any of her work, go to Westchester Library System, get yourself some of her works from the library. I'm sure that there's some e-books or audio that you can listen to or read digitally. So, so you can see Little Bee going. I'm going to be going over today some background on bees. So again, if you've been to my programs before, you have probably heard a lot of this information before. I'm also going to be going over my personal interest, highlights from my hive, and most importantly, how you can get involved, especially right now from your own home. So I always want to distinguish this. I always want to start off with this. So many people like to, they say, I hate bees. I don't like bees. And many times what they really mean is something else. And this image has two, insects on it. The one on the left of the screen is a honeybee, European honeybee, and the insect on the right is actually a yellow jacket, a wasp. many times when I talk to people and they say, oh, I hate bees, they're awful, they're aggressive, they really are talking about wasps and yellow jackets in particular, because they're very nasty. Other wasps are not as aggressive as even yellow jackets. So I always want to mention that, because it's not synonymous. And actually, this image brings us to a link about different bees and wasps. This is from the Massachusetts Audubon, but Massachusetts is close enough to New York. A lot of these different bees and wasps you would find here in New York. It discusses social bees, solitary bees. Have you guys ever seen a sweat bee? Those are really cool. They're literally metallic green. They are amazing. And then different social wasps, as well as solitary wasps. I think there's a few down here. Yeah, solitary wasps. So I definitely recommend, checking that out and seeing, identifying and looking at different bees and wasps, because they're not, though they are related, they're not the same. And I'm just going to bring us back. Oops. 1 second. Oh. Hold on, guys. Bear with me. There we go. So today I'm talking about the European honeybee, also known as Apis mellifera. It's native to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Hold on 1 second. Oops. And they're social bees. So they're comprised of workers, drones, and the queen. So I will look over those in a second. So on the left, as you can see, that elongated bee is a queen bee. And that blue mark is not natural. That's actually a mark that many beekeepers put on the queen so you can easily identify them. And there are different colors for different years. I don't know off the top of my head which color is which year, but there's like 4 colors, like blue, green, red, and yellow. And they are, every other year is a different color that you mark the queen. And it's just for, easy identification. Because if you're looking at a frame, the bees are constantly moving. And if you're trying to identify your queen, it's easier if she has a flash of color on her. Now in the upper right picture, that's a worker bee. Those are the bees you see on flowers flying around. They're the ones that sting you. They are the majority of the hive. Both the queen and the worker bees are female. The main difference is that the queen has developed ovaries, which enables her to lay eggs. And the worker bees, they do not have developed ovaries, so they're not able to lay eggs. And it's really fascinating. And the queen bee has a pheromone that she emits that the other bees, they know her scent. And if the queen were to die, for example, within an hour of her death, they would know, the rest of the hive would know that she's gone, because that pheromone is no longer being emitted. So it's really fascinating stuff. And again, going back to that quote from the beginning, nothing in nature, it's not alone, right? This is all part of one huge system. And on the bottom of this screen, you will see that bee with like big bulging eyes, and it looks a little bit stockier. So those are the male bees, and they're called drones. Drones do not have stingers, and there are definitely not as many drones in a hive as worker bees. And the drones do fly. They actually they mate with other queens from other hives, so it creates genetic diversity. But besides reproduction, they really don't do much. They're really just hanging out. The worker bees, the worker bees are the ones that are doing basically everything. They forage, they're foragers, they're nurses, they're undertakers. They have all these different jobs within the hive, and it's really, really interesting stuff. So those are the ones you see out and about. I just wanted to show you the life cycle of honeybees. In 21 days, and you'll see some cool pictures in a second, it goes from being an egg, which it looks like a small rice grain, goes from an egg to an adult in 21 days. And from egg, it goes to larval stage, then it goes to the pupal stage, and then it becomes an adult. And you see like worker feeds larva and seals the cell once larva reaches full growth. Those are known as the nurse bees. And they're all worker bees, but they have these different roles and different aspects of their life cycle. So actually foraging, the ones you see out and about, going from flower to flower, pollinating, those are older bees, because they have these different levels. So it's really cool. So beekeeping, 15,000 BC is the oldest known record of primitive beekeeping paintings. And it's speculated that honeybees were first brought to America by Irish and Norwegian explorers pre-Columbus. They were definitely introduced from Europe for honey production in the early 1600s. So they've been here for quite a while, the European honeybee. But besides honeybees, we have many native bees, mostly solitary bees that live in this area and in other parts of the country and the world. Again, I encourage you to look into those species more. But again, we're talking about the European honeybee today. And in this picture, that's my beekeeping partner, Lauren, holding one of our frames. And as you can see, there's a bunch of bees on it. And, we inspect it for different things. And I'll go into that. But my personal interest, it's kind of weird, but I was in high school and I was at school one day and I got stung. And of course it hurt, but the thing I was most upset about was not that I had been stung and I was in pain, but the fact that the bee died, because when honeybees sting, they die. Their barb of their stinger gets stuck in your skin and it ends up basically ripping them apart. So I was so upset, and I really wanted to learn more about them, and I also knew that they, needed to be advocated for and helped, because they're really important creatures. So that's really how I became interested in them. And then from there, I met Lauren through a mutual friend, and we were talking one day, and we both were talking about honey and bees and how much we love honey and bees. And then she told me that she lived in Bedford at the time. She was very involved in the Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers. She had been involved for like a number of years. She had built her own hive, but the problem was she wasn't able to keep the hive on her property, and she had no one to keep with. So she just kind of held out. And when we got to talking that day, she said, "Would you want to keep bees together?" And I was like, okay, like, I couldn't believe that, that was going to, I didn't expect to keep bees anytime soon. So it was through that kind of somewhat spontaneous decision that we started on this journey. And I'm not kidding you. It has been one of the biggest highlights of the last couple years of my life. It's really been an awesome and enlightening process and hobby. So this is just some shots of us at our hive, and working together. There are many beekeepers that do this alone, but her and I have both talked about how we really rely on each other, and we make a good team working on our hive together and fixing problems, analyzing different things. So it's really been great doing this together with her. So I'm going to go over some highlights. As you can see, these lovely couple of pictures of some really bad stings I got. Actually, this past season, I did not get stung. The last bad incident I had was October of 2018. And these were those stings from there. And honestly, as awful as it was, especially getting multiple stings in one sitting, the reason why both Lauren and I had been attacked was totally our own doing. We weren't listening to the bees, because one of the things you actually acquire when you're working on a beehive is listening to the bees and their temperament. You can tell if bees are aggravated. You can tell if bees are calm. And honestly, the way you know is if they're aggravated, they're angrily like it's a very like nasty buzzing sound that they make. Whereas if they're content and doing their own thing, you really don't hear bees. Like it's more of a gentle hum, and it's really relaxing, honestly. So we were working on the hive at a time we shouldn't have worked on the hive. We were working on them late in the day, and we weren't listening to them. And because of that, we ended up, getting ourselves in trouble and getting attacked. So I really want to stress the fact that honeybees aren't just, usually going around wanting to sting you. It's usually if you're disturbing them or you're not listening to them, that's the reason why they would sting. Whereas a yellow jacket, for example, they can spot you from like half a mile away and be like, oh, I'm going to go sting them now, and sting repeatedly. Whereas the honeybee, if they sting you, it's really, it's a matter of life and death for them. So if they do sting you, it is totally a defense mechanism. So I just wanted to highlight that, because stings do happen, not all the time. Like I said, the last time I got stung was October of 2018. So that was over a year ago. But it's definitely important to note. So this was before we winterized the hive. So the honeybees do survive the winter. They don't hibernate. What they do is they cluster. So if you can look at that hive, and I'm just going to take a sip of water. Hold on a second. If you look at that hive and you see like the black papered area, that the bees will be clustered there in a ball. In the center of that cluster is the queen. She needs to be kept at like 98 degrees. She needs to be kept at a certain temperature, and then it's almost like rings around her of the bees, and the other bees will kind of move in and out from each other to keep that heat going. They're really regulating that heat. But she's at the center always, because if she dies, they die. So in the winter, it's important to do what we can to help the bees stay alive over the winter. So we put this black paper on so that if the sun hits the paper, it helps regulate the temperature. It helps keep things warm. As you can see, there's some tape on there, like reflective tape, and that helps as well. We would stop up any of the drafts that might be occurring from the sugar board, because we have to leave food for them as well. So we leave honey for them that they've put together, and then we also leave a sugar board, which is literally what it sounds like. It's basically a board of sugar, so that if they eat through all of their honey during the winter, they can access that sugar as like a supplementary source of food. And above that, that big box on top, that is called a quilt box. And there we put like wood shavings in there. And the purpose of that is really to keep moisture out, because it's not so much the cold that kills bees over the winter. It's a whole combination of things, but moisture is one of the biggest culprits for bees dying over the winter. Because if water drips down, like if ice melts or snow melts and it drips down into the hive, you know, if you get into water and then it's cold outside, you know, you feel it even more so than if you're dry. So it's really, it can just totally decimate a hive. So there are all these different components to getting a hive ready for winter, winterizing a hive. There's so many different components. So this is just us getting that all prepared. And as you can see, you know, in my hand is actually a drone bee, and the drones are the first to go in the before the winter. So because drones, well, let me explain this. So a queen, if a queen lays an unfertilized egg, that egg becomes a drone, becomes a male bee. Fertilized eggs become female bees. So unfertilized eggs become males, fertilized eggs become females. So it's easy to lay drones because the queen does not need to be fertilized in order to lay the drones. And since there aren't as many drones in a honeybee hive to begin with, it's not as important to have them over the winter. And so all the drones are kicked out and they die before the winter because they're trying to conserve as much as they can in preparation for the winter. And they really want the worker bees, as many worker bees as possible, to survive the winter so that when spring comes around, they can get right on the ball and get things rolling. So that's a drone bee that I have in my hand. And then there's some bees, mostly worker bees, that are dead outside of the entrance of the hive. And as you can see, that little white metal thing with holes in it, it's called a mouse guard. Because, you know, like mice trying to get in your house during the winter, mice love a honeybee hive because it has food, it has warmth. Why wouldn't they want to live in the hive for the winter? So we install that in the fall so that we deter mice from getting into the hive. But as you can see, there are a bunch of dead bees, and that's not a bad thing. If you see dead bees outside of your the entrance of your hive, you at least know that there are bees that are going in and out of your hive still. So, but you know, it's good to just monitor on a warm day in the winter. If your hive is alive, you will see bees coming in and out. Last year, Lauren and I went on like a 28-degree day, and the bees were poking their little heads out of the holes. So you should be able to see your bees, you know, being active even in the winter to maybe do a cleansing flight or anything of that nature. But you know, it just takes, the hardest part about the winter is the patience and not knowing for sure how your hive is doing, and just having to wait to really open it up until the spring. But winter passes, and before long, spring comes around. And like I had mentioned to you about the sugar board, which we leave in the winter, there's also, we would make a fondant, which is a little bit more, it's also sugar, but it's like a more pliable sugar that we'd leave these patties of fondant in the hive to make it easier for the bees to get that energy to start getting out and doing what they do, foraging and everything like that. You know, in March especially, even though it's the beginning of spring in March, it's very dead outside still, especially up here. It's very gray. And though we do have some amazing, you know, flowers like dandelions, crocuses, these are really important food for bees. Even maples, like, you know, any flowers that are coming up are really important. Those little tiny flowers are really, really important for the pollinators. But we're just kind of aiding them in that energy boost. So you know, we make some fondant for them. Even in this picture, you see me holding like a mason jar. That's sugar water. We don't feed bees all year because they're self-sufficient. They can take care of themselves. They can get energy from nature. But we do feed them for the winter, like we leave that sugar board for them, and then we feed them for the first few months of spring. Honestly, by May, like May of last year, I took the sugar water out and they were completely fine. So you don't want to feed them all year, because if you feed them all year, then, you know, the honey's not going to be, you know, pure honey. It's really going to be like sugar water, or mostly just that simple sugar. You want the complexity of that, of raw honey, and what the bees find when they're foraging. And as you can see, you know, the bees are active. You know, in that last shot, you saw a bunch of dead bees, but you can see the bees are active and ready to go. So this is one of my favorite pictures, because if you just take a quick look, okay, that's comb, and then there's, you know, the bees. But if you look inside of those cells, do you see those little tiny rice grains I was talking about? You see really small, in a lot of those cells, you see that tiny grain. And those are the eggs. And one of the most satisfying and exciting feelings when you're looking at a frame is seeing that. And it's really hard sometimes because, again, the bees are all over the place. They're walking all over the place. They're flying around. And you don't want to keep the hive open too long because you don't want to disturb the bees for too long. So it's really satisfying and exciting to see those eggs, because then you know the queen is alive and that the hive is thriving. I'm going to admit, the last time I saw the queen of our hive was when we installed that hive. We really had trouble seeing her. She had a red dot on her back, but we're convinced that our hive had swarmed, which means that it basically split apart, and the queen and a portion of the original hive had left and found another home, and then the other bees were left at the original hive. Now, if that happens, or like I was explaining before, if the queen dies, or the queen absconds and she leaves, the worker bees can take that egg. So let's say the queen, something happened to the queen. One of these bees on this page, one of these worker bees would take that, one of those eggs, and they would feed that egg to become a queen. And you heard me right. Queens are fed to become queens. Like, you know, it's like you are what you eat. In the bee world, it literally is. You can take two, and the fertilized eggs, like I told you before, are female. So if you take two eggs right next to each other, right, and you feed them even slightly differently, one is fed, it's called royal jelly. The other one is fed bee bread. The royal jelly, that egg becomes a queen. The bee bread, that egg becomes a worker. So it's, I don't know the exact like amino acid profiles of what they're fed, but that's what it comes down to. So if there are these eggs, right, the worker bees have the time to be able to fix a situation. If they don't have a queen anymore, they can make a queen. So, and that's crucial to the stability and the outcome of the hive. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. And as you can see in this picture, those eggs become larvae. And it's funny because honestly, they don't look that great. I mean, they look kind of like maggots, but I never thought that I would think a maggot is cute before, but I think that the larva is so cute because I know that they're going to become bees, and bees are just so amazing. And it really makes you appreciate, all of these creatures do. And, here you can see in this left shot, you can see all that capped goodness. That's honey. And the bees cap the honey. So they take the nectar from the flowers and they deposit it into the cells. And it's not, as soon as they get the nectar and deposit in the cell, it doesn't just become honey. It has to get to a certain consistency. The consistency we know as honey, that a little bit slower. It's not water, it's slower, and it's got the viscosity that is just unique to what it is, and it's got that consistency, that stickiness. That's when it becomes honey, and the bees know when it's ready to be capped. And when honey is capped, it's ready to go. So if I wanted to take some of that honey, I would uncap the cells and I would put it into an extractor, and I would take some of that honey, or I would even just cut the comb and make cut comb honey. So there are different options, or I would just leave it for the bees. And that's really what Lauren and I did. We took 2 frames and just cut the comb out this past year and left the rest for the bees. And each beekeeper is different. I do believe there's a big difference between beekeeping and honey producing. You have those who their main goal is to produce as much honey or bee related products as possible, and then you have those who want to keep the bees and tend to them and make sure that they're doing well, that you're helping them. And I do believe there's a big difference there, but it's really amazing stuff, as you can see. And if you can see in this upper right corner, if you look at that bee that has the little orange pads on its sides, those are called pollen baskets. And the hairs on the backs of the bee's legs, they collect the pollen from flower to flower, and they put it on those legs, and it stays on those hairs, and then they bring it back to the hive. And sometimes you can get bee pollen. I'll show you. I have a little bit of bee pollen from that's local. I got it in the city. I don't believe it's from New York City. I know there's some beekeepers that keep on the roofs of New York City, but I think it's from New Jersey. But just to show you, and yeah, I mean, it's amazing that they carry that with them. They collect it and carry it. Again, a huge part of pollination. They're amazing pollinators. And in this bottom right picture, you can kind of see like bees hanging onto each other. That's called a bee chain. So they're hanging onto each other, and they do that to kind of stabilize each other, hold each other up. They do bee chains when they're making the comb. Wax is actually secreted from the underside of the bees. It kind of comes off in sheets, and it takes a lot of energy to create comb. So that's why it's important we also kind of supplement them with that food, because then they're able to make comb and make reparations or anything like that, and they hang on to each other to do that. This is just showing you the bottom two boxes in this left picture. Those are brood boxes. So the brood is going to be in there, and brood is the bees, the baby bees. All the living is happening really in the bottom two. And then the upper two boxes are called honey supers. And the honey supers, they're like extra space, like storage space for honey. It's the extra honey we can have, we can take some of the honey also for them if you just want to leave honey for them. So it's like extra storage space. Now, that's important because, like I had mentioned before, where a hive will split, it's not bad if a hive splits. It means that they're growing and they want to go create another hive elsewhere. But if you want to prevent that from happening, you want to give them as much space as possible. So you want to add that extra storage because they grow so quickly. The queen bee lays so many eggs a day, hundreds of eggs a day, and those bees are constantly, the hive is constantly growing. So they need that extra space. And it also helps if you want to take some honey too. So now I'm transitioning into the pest management side of this conversation. The biggest pest, there are definitely pests that affect honeybees, and the biggest one is called the varroa mite. And honestly, I'll show you a picture. You see these little red circles? Those little oval shaped creatures in each circle, those are varroa mites. And I compare them to ticks. They feed on the blood and fat stores of the bees, and they actually do, they get into the brood chambers, and they totally deform the new bees. And you can see this in like, there's a thing called deformed wing virus, and the bees will literally be like lame because of these pests. So there are a number of pests that affect honeybees, but this is the most serious because varroa mites originate from Asia. And the Asian honeybee has evolved to be able to defend themselves against this mite. They're able to kind of manage it. The European honeybee, the varroa mite's only been in the United States now for, a few decades, I think since 1980 something. So the European honeybee hasn't had the time to evolve any defenses against this mite. Because of that, it's crucial that we are there to try to support them, to try to manage this mite. And there are different methods. If you can see in this left picture with those heavy-duty gloves, that's called hop guard, and it's a natural method to try to not eliminate, but definitely curb the varroa mite population. So it's literally made out of hops. Varroa mites don't like hops. So it's a natural solution that you can put into the hive. And on the right side, you can see like there's a white bee. It's not actually a white bee. It's covered in powdered sugar because you can do little tests to see how many mites might be in a certain sample of bees. And one of the tests that we do is called the sugar roll. And you put a cup full of bees, literally you scoop them, you put them into a Rubbermaid container, you scoop them up, plop them into the mason jar, put the lid on, and the lid has a screen, so obviously they can breathe. And you set it down for a couple minutes, and this gives them time to kind of get the sugar on them, and then you shake it. And as you shake it onto like a plate, like a white plate, you should be able to see mites come out, and you can see them a little bit better by like spraying some water on the plate. But the whole purpose is you want to try to count how many mites are in a certain sample of bees. And there's also something you can do called the alcohol wash, but the alcohol wash kills the bees. This does not. So we've done this, and honestly, regardless of what you may see in these tests, it's usually a great idea to treat the bees anyway. And there are many natural methods. There's the hop guard. This hop guard we did in the summer because it's too hot to treat with another method that we've done called Mite Away, and that uses this natural acid that both bees and like ants have in their toxins, like in their stings, neurotoxins. So that also helps with the mites, but this is what we did in the summer. But there are different methods, natural methods, and it's important to treat for mites. And I actually want to take a moment here, I guess, to tell you, my hive did not survive the winter. And the main reason that happened, the main reason why the bees did not survive, is because they're at the bee yard where we keep our bees. There was another beekeeper who did not believe in treating for the mites. And because of this, their bees, because they weren't being treated for these mites, that population of mites affected our hives, and it ended up killing our bees because, like I told you, they spread diseases. These mites, they decimate hives. So that this very small, like super small, and if you could remember from the beginning of the presentation, that picture of someone's hand with some bees, and it looked like almost like little pepper flakes on the person's hand. That's how small these mites are. Those are mites. And they just completely decimate a hive. So they're the reason why I don't have a hive currently, and why our bees did not survive. So it's very important to treat naturally, because it's all about management, right? It's all about pest management. You may not be able to completely eradicate these creatures, but managing them is key to the honeybees' survival. And there's some other pests, as you can see in this left photo. That little beetle, it's called a small hive beetle. They really are pests, these pests. They're not, they shouldn't decimate your hive unless it really got out of control. If you're seeing them, you can do different methods of trying to control them. There are different tools you can use to try to eradicate them. You just have to keep your eyes peeled, and then there are definitely different ways to control them. And in this upper hand picture, those are wax moths, and it's more of a nuisance than anything. If they get into your honey, the larva loves to eat the honey. All those little black things are its defecation. They just can ravage through the honey stores. Again, a strong hive will fend off both the beetles and the moths. And this it looks like a bullet hole on the bottom picture. That's a carpenter bee hole. The carpenter bee was trying to get into the honeybee hive to, burrow through the wood to start making a home for itself. And then it realized, oh, no, not this place. So you may be asking yourself, where can I keep bees, right? And I just strongly encourage you. So if you live somewhere where you believe you can keep bees on your property, keep them on your property. I think if you can, you should. But that's not to say if you can't keep them on your property, you can't keep bees at all. The only way I was able to keep bees was by finding a place to keep bees with Lauren. And that place was Ossining at the Mariandale Center. And it was through that network in that community that I was able to keep bees in general, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to. And the Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers, because Lauren was involved previously, we knew a network of people right off the bat. But it's those grassroots community organizations that can help you achieve your goals in helping the bees or whatever you're passionate about, starting a beehive. So it was through that network that we were able to keep the bees. So I encourage you, brainstorm. Think of different places you'd like to keep a hive. Again, if you can keep them on your property, even better, but it's not completely necessary. You can definitely keep bees elsewhere too. And again, it was through that experience that we were even able to keep them in Ossining. Both Lauren and I live in White Plains. We live in apartments. We don't have a place to keep bees. So this was really a great place for us. And there's a little video I made. I thought you guys would like this. This is uncapping the honey.
There you go. Keep moving it.
And you can hear Eric is one of our mentors. We had many mentors have.
Beautiful. See how it falls off?
Just watch. You can see that honey. We're uncapping the honey. So we're about to put it into an extractor. As you can see, all those different colors. And that's the extractor, and it's spinning around.
Oh, there it is.
The first drop of many. Yep, there's the extractor. So as you can see, it's like a whole process, even just getting honey extracted from the comb. But it's the mentorship that has made this whole experience. You can't do this without mentorship, without the community. The community is what, you can't do it alone, right? So, okay. And I just want to share these really, the best thing about keeping bees is the meditative properties. There is nothing like listening to them, watching them. It is just really, really calming, just being able to experience them doing what they do. And I think especially at this time, it's really important to kind of delight in nature and to fully engage that way. So as you can see them even like going in and out of the hive, it's fascinating. They kind of have a bee path in and out of the hive. And you don't want to stand in front of a hive in front of their path, because that's how they get in and out. It's like a highway. You don't want to stand right in the middle. So, but it's really fascinating if you stand to the side and just watch them. And of course, just standing there with the frame in hand and just seeing them on the frame. Again, you don't want to keep the hive open too long. You don't want to disturb them for too long. You want to make sure that you do things as swiftly as possible, as efficiently, but as swiftly as possible. But it is great to just watch. And you could see even in this shot right here, you got honey on the perimeters. And then if you look towards the bottom, you see those packed cells. That's all full of pollen. And they take that pollen and they pack the cells. So the pollen is good protein for them, and the honey's energy, and it's just all a network. So how can you get involved? Number one, doing your research. Number one, The library. The library is your best friend in terms of getting research done. You've got books, you've got different resources that the library has. If you just explore Westchester Library System, the page, you can see what different things are available for you to look into. But yeah, just good old books and magazines even. These are catalogs from Manlake and Didant. They have, if you're interested in keeping your own bees, they have equipment. And I follow, it's called the American Bee Journal. It's a periodical, and it comes to my doorstep, but I'm sure you can get this digitally. And it has information in here, has great articles, a lot of scientific information, as well as information like on how to get your own bees and things like that. And just books in general. I have the Beekeeper's Bible, the Bee Book, and bees in general. Definitely books and those periodicals are great information. And honestly, the internet. If I click on this, Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers, I highly recommend you check them out. And actually, it so happens, I don't think it's listed on here yet, but if you go on Facebook, I just saw today that their next meeting, the Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers meeting, is this Saturday, and it's virtual, so you can just log right in from home. I totally recommend you do. And it's public, so anyone, whether you're a beekeeper currently or not, you can access and you can join the meetings either in person or virtually. And this one, again, is going to be virtual. So I recommend, if you have Facebook, follow them on Facebook, Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers, and sign up for the next event. They'll send you a Zoom link and you can join, or if you want me to send it to you, I'm happy to. My email is Erin Provenzano at gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to me. So I definitely recommend checking out Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers, because the wealth of information, the mentorship, that is, it's invaluable. I mean, it's amazing. So definitely check them out. As well as, there are a bunch of different things you can check out. Hudson Valley Bee Supply, that's who you would go to for the supplies. They're based out of Kingston, which is about like an hour and a half north of Tuckahoe. And you can pick up different bee packages, and they have all different equipment. They even have things for kids. So I definitely recommend checking them out as well. And just a side note, I'm talking about the Hudson Valley, right? But I know there are a number of people on here who aren't in New York. And I just totally encourage you to go, and search in your local county or city, town. See what's available to you around where you live and start there. And I'm sure that there's a bee supply. I'm sure that there is a beekeeping group. I'm almost certain there are beekeeping groups all over the country, if not the world. So definitely recommend doing your research. And again, do your research. If that's if you want to get involved starting your own hive, but you may be sitting here saying, I don't want to start my own hive. I either can't, or I want to support the bees, but I really don't want to keep bees. And that's all well and good too. There are definitely ways that you can support bees without being a beekeeper. And, the more people that learn about them and how they can help, the more great things that will happen for them. So for example, the Honeybee Conservancy, they have a list of different ways you can help. And obviously, sponsoring a hive. Fundraising is really, important for a lot of different nonprofits and these efforts, these grassroots efforts. But you can do citizen science, which is so important. And take note of what you're seeing in your own backyard, in your park. In Tuckahoe, one of my favorite places ever to go is Parkway Oval Park, and there's a bunch of great things you can see there. But no matter where you live, you can see and you could be a part of citizen science. And again, fundraising, plant a garden. I actually have these seeds I've been holding on to for a little bit. They're called bee seed bombs. I think I got them from the Botanical Garden. And there are so many. You can do your research too. I know in at least one of my books, it talks about gardening for bees. So again, you don't have to keep bees to keep bees, to encourage their growth and their survival. So if you're a gardener, or even if you're not a gardener, plant. And you can start by, if you live in an apartment, you can start with seedlings, and maybe you could put a little flower box on your window. There are definitely ways that you can help the bees that way. And if you're an educator, teaching about different pollinators, not just honeybees, but other pollinators as well, butterflies, birds, a bunch of different creatures. And of course, becoming a bee ambassador. So, and going pesticide free, definitely. And you can train, but I definitely recommend checking out the Honeybee Conservancy and, different things like that, because you don't need to keep in order to keep bees. And if I've learned anything through this time of social distancing and everything like that, I have learned how important virtual, anything virtual is. So I definitely recommend looking things up and following them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and staying engaged virtually. I know I have been really enjoying a lot of different environmental groups that I'm following on different social media outlets. I've been enjoying different virtual programs they've been having, and information they've been sharing. As sad as it is, not doing what I had been planning to do during this spring, I definitely feel enlightened and engaged and connected just through these different outlets. So I really recommend checking those things out. And I'm sorry, I see it's already 7:30, but can I answer any questions for you? I would love to be able to answer for you.
Okay, Erin, that was great. Erin, I'm going to unmute everybody. So do you want to stop sharing your screen so everybody could see you?
Sure. You know what? And before I actually get to the questions, I just wanted to share one more thing. And it's a quote that I've really been kind of like meditating on, especially at this time. And it's by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. And as someone who is not the most patient person in the world, things like beekeeping, and just observing and being a part of nature, it just instantly puts you into that mindset of patience. And it's very important if we're going to continue, on our path for honeybees, for nature, for the earth. So I just wanted to share that, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Excellent. That was great. So what we'll do is I'm going to unmute everybody, and maybe you can raise your hand if you have a question, and then Erin can take a question that you have. Can you see? You could also put your videos back on if you choose to, or you could just tell us if you have a question. Kate?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I was wondering what has been one of the biggest challenges for you personally for this over the past 2 years?
Probably honestly the patience part. Winter has been the hardest because you prepare so much for the winter, and then during the winter, even though you can go visit your bees and look at them from the outside, you can't go in there. You just have to kind of guess. There were many times this winter where it was like, are they alive or aren't they alive? Are they alive? Aren't they alive? And that, I think winter has been the hardest part. It's been a huge learning experience, and I've definitely enjoyed that respect, but that's been the most challenging thing.
Yeah, I could imagine that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
Erin, can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Donald. Hi, yeah.
With your hive dying, can you reuse the frames and repopulate the same hive?
That's a great question. So, yes and no. Yes, we can, as long as there's not a lot of damage to the frames. I'm actually planning on going this weekend to like deconstruct it, and Lauren and I are like figuring out like, okay, we are gonna have to stay socially distanced to like deconstruct and like really be smart about things concerning the pandemic, but like as long as you don't see, so there's something called American foul brood. It's not common, but if you see, there are different telltale signs. Like for example, if you take like a Q-tip and put it into the cell and it comes out brown and stringy, that means you have foul brood. In that case, you'd actually take the whole hive and light a bonfire. Not even throw away, you would light a bonfire. So yeah, if that isn't the case, if your hive just died, like ours died of the mites, you would clean out, you would still clean the frames and make sure that they're okay, but then you can introduce another hive into, like if you get a package of bees, you can introduce those bees and reuse those frames. But you have to really know your stuff and probably have a mentor with you to make sure that you're not going to reuse things that are really harmful and damaging. But yes and no, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's a good question.
That's a really great question.
And Marge, you had a question?
Yeah, I got kicked off a couple of times, so I'm not sure. Did you show a slide where you had the different cells with different colors because of the pollen?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No. So, the different colors, we call it like a pollen mosaic, because if you go to different flowers, you see different pollen colors, right? So one of my favorite colors of pollen is actually the crocus, that really bright orange. It's like gorgeous. But then you have all different flowers that have different colored pollen. So then they pack into those different cells, and you'll get like a dark yellow next to a bright orange next to a green. Some flowers have strange looking pollen. They have like purples and greens and everything. So yeah, in one of the last images I showed, it was showing on a frame, on the perimeter you had this honey, capped honey, and then in the center you had cells full of pollen. And that the pollen is that protein for them, and then the honey is the energy.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Another great question.
Record it, Marge. So we
Pardon
did,
me?
We are recording it, so hopefully you'll be able to see that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Was there any other? Is there another question?
Ginger, you have a question?
Yes. My question is, I remember several years ago reading about colony collapse disorder.
Mm-hmm.
How bad is that, or has that improved over the years?
That's a loaded question, and honestly, as an amateur beekeeper, I don't even know the full extent of it in terms of statistics and whatnot. It's bad. Actually, this year, so I attended the virtual meeting for the Hudson Valley Natural Beekeepers last month. And beekeepers that have been doing this for over a decade, if not 2 decades and more, had lost, at least one hive this year. So sometimes sometimes the colonies collapsing is because of, the mites are a huge thing. The mites are definitely a huge reason why the colonies are collapsing. But even if you look at this past winter we had, it was very mild. And you may think, oh, a mild winter, that's good. The bees will survive a mild winter. No, because the bees end up not clustering as tightly if it's too warm out, right? And they end up disorienting themselves and maybe leaving the hive, coming back, and they're not able to retain that winter state that they're supposed to be in. And they don't hibernate, they cluster. So they're all different. There are so many different reasons for a colony to collapse. And you have to autopsy a hive after it's died, to really try to understand why did the hive die, why did the colony collapse. So it's still definitely an issue. And I don't know much more to that in terms of statistics and that kind of thing, but very good question.
Also, how many times a year is honey collected from a hive?
Good. Yeah, good question. The harvest time is what we consider the harvest time, right? When's the harvest time for us? That's the fall. So we collect in October, November. November, here we're usually preparing for winter in November, but October is really usually the time we harvest. And that's to make sure that we're thinking about the bees. I mean, if you talk to a commercial beekeeper, they're probably harvesting all year round, but or almost all year round. But we really follow harvesting in the fall, September and October.
Okay, thank
So I
you.
think we have time for one more question. Does anybody else have a question?
Oh, I think Heather. I think Heather does.
Eddie, did you have a question? I could unmute you. Okay, Eddie, you're unmuted.
Oh, no, they're still muted.
Sorry, Ed, you want to unmute? I tried to unmute you.
Now, okay, do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have a question because I've had friends who've had bees, and there's always like the predator issues. So besides bears, which I know, what other predators prey on hives?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a really good question, and especially where you live. So to give some context, Heather's asking that from Kent, New York, and
We have hawks,
bears.
foxes, we have hawks, we have everything.
Yeah. I mean, bears are a huge thing. I'm always seeing, I totally recommend you check out and follow different things on social media. I follow like women in beekeeping and different beekeeping groups on Facebook. And I'm always seeing, Northeast Beekeeping is another one. I always see, fellow beekeepers that live, even in New York, but way up in more rural parts of New York, and a bear got to their hive. Or I feel like, I guess even raccoons could, but the bear's the biggest thing. But anything if they can access it. Mice, you think, oh, a mouse could destruct a hive. But if you don't put those mouse guards on before the winter, and a mouse ends up living in your hive, when you open it back up, it's disgusting. The mice have created a nest in there. They've been eating the honey. It's not to say that your bees will die per se, but you have to clean that out. If they've been living there, they've been defecating. It's just a whole thing. So something as small as a mouse can end up affecting a hive, but definitely bears are a big thing. But I feel like anything that can knock a hive over or get itself in there can affect them. Even wasps. There's a season called robbing season, and it's July, because July is really the July and August. It's like the dearth, there's really nothing out. So the wasps are scavengers. That's why when you're having a picnic, they want to come over, because they want to eat your meat. They want to scavenge, and they know that there's honey in those hives, and they will do their damnedest to get in there and to rob the honey. And also other bees will rob as well, but they can, if they rob enough, they can totally decimate the hive as well. So, you've got insects to worry about, you've got bears to worry about. Doesn't matter if they're this big or if they're this big. You just got to be aware.
That was Erin. Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to you rebuilding. And you've learned a lot, and we've learned a lot through you. So even if we're not beekeeping ourselves, I feel like I'm experiencing it through what you're sharing. So we want to thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. And thank you all of us for joining us. And we plan on this being available as a recording. So thank you, everybody, and everybody have a good evening.